Toshi and I have been friends for almost 20 years. I met him on a beach in Cape Cod during a psytrance party. He was an established VJ in the Boston scene, and I was just trying to figure out how that whole world worked. He brought me into the fold and taught me about the software and the methods that people were using to mix visuals live to electronic music. We've stayed in touch throughout the years, both moving to the Bay Area, both pursuing our careers, watching each other grow and mature on our own respective paths. And when he agreed to do an episode of the Luminous Arts, I was stoked. And even though we couldn't sit down in person, it was so good to catch up. Toshi is an amazingly deep thinker and a very intelligent guy. Our conversation was fun because it let both of us go deep on some really important topics relating to the ethics of the use of technology. He works for the Institute for the Future, a nonprofit focused on just that. He runs a department there that allows him to explore, among other things, the various ways that VR can be used to generate positive change in the world. I think you're going to dig this conversation. It winds its way through the world of immersive new media art, through the role of social media in society, and into our responsibility to help shape the world using technology. So let's dive right in. You're working for the Institute for the Future. We haven't really hung out since you got that job, and I don't really understand. Like, I went to the website, I still don't get it.
Yeah.
Like, what is the Institute for the Future?
Well, it's a lot of things. I think that's partially why it's hard to understand. It's a highly distributed organization. That's a big part of its kind of um, genesis and pattern is a lot about kind of how, I mean, essentially the core question of Institute for the Future is how will society, relationships, economics, communities change when you introduce new types of distributed communication technologies. And
Mm-hmm.
we're looking at how that infiltrates and transforms and impacts all areas of human existence. From a chronological standpoint, Institute for the Future was founded in 1968 with some of the computer scientists who were working at the Rand Corporation on the early ARPANET, and it
Oh,
was the
interesting.
original internet basically when it was still just military installations and academic institutions trying to build redundant communication systems that could withstand a nuclear attack was basically kind of the assignment that birthed the ARPANET and then which
Right.
became the internet. And these original founders really, were thinking about, well, how is this new network communication technology going to impact beyond academic and military applications? And they were really thinking about long-term futures, and that's really been.
Interesting. So they were actually thinking about that before the internet even became like a public thing.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and that's why they left actually to start the Institute for the Future. And they actually, the first 15 years, I mean, it's, 50 something year old organization. The first 15 years they were spending trying to develop kind of what software, computational systems to try to predict the future. So they built these kind of Oracle systems, these Oracle expert, and these Delphi systems, like these kind of expert systems to try to, how do for the military and the academic institutions, they were trying to think like, how is this going to like transform knowledge and ability
Isn't that what the,
to.
the, the, the movie War Games was based on? You remember that movie
Um,
from the 80s where they were
yeah,
like,
of course. Yeah, well, that's simulation technology. So that, the idea was, artificial intelligence and how can we simulate scenarios. So that's a little bit about, what Institute was trying to do. But there's a famous paper that was published around 15 years in where they basically, I'll paraphrase here, but they basically said like, you can't, not only can you not predict the future, but the future, there is not one future. There's lots of possible futures. And maybe they just didn't have enough powerful computers. I mean, we kind of jumped to today, and that's a lot of what AI is trying to do is predict the future of the weather, predict the future of the market, predict the future of individuals. Um,
right.
but in some ways, I mean, I think Institute, in terms of its practice, is really focused a lot more on kind of thinking through like what does humanity, asking kind of the philosophical question, what does humanity want to do, and what kind of types of futures do we want to create, and how do we go about creating systems of thought and conversation and collaboration to help us structure our conversations about the future. And that's kind of like the core practice at IFTF. But we have
Right.
different labs at IFTF where they apply that same kind of mechanism and ethos into areas of like looking at the future of healthcare or the future of families or the future of work. And
So
so
is it
there's
a
different.
I guess it sounds like a think tank.
It's like
Almost.
it is basically a think tank. Yeah, we're sitting around in a big tank thinking together independently. It's a nonprofit, so the way we make money, we don't have a big endowment, so we're not like living off of interest on some big endowment. We basically have a membership of organizations, mostly large companies, government agencies, big foundations who pay into our just annual partnership program where we do our foundational research and we pick a different theme and do a 10-year forecast every year on a different theme.
Hmm.
That's our kind of foundational research. And then we also do custom forecasts and custom projects for clients. And then we also have a whole training arm in which we teach people how to use our foresight tools and methodologies.
That's very cool, man.
Yeah.
And your role in this is specifically around VR?
Not really. I've done a lot of work researching and prototyping virtual reality and XR technologies, but essentially the lab is called the Emerging Media Lab. So we're looking at, basically the impact of emerging media technologies, how it transforms how we connect, collaborate, and communicate. VR, the lab was formed in 2016, and so that was right at the birth of consumer VR, this kind of latest era that we're living through, where now it's kind of switching from being just only in the labs to being something that's actually, commercialized and kind of more widely available. The Institute has been talking about virtual reality since the 70s and 80s. Actually, my first book about VR was written by Howard Rheingold called Virtual Reality that I read in the 90s. That was my first kind of exposure, not just to the technology side of it, but how is this going to transform our ways of being able to communicate, do things like therapy, understand our own identities differently. Howard is a
Well,
super
VR is
big
kind of like
visionary.
it's kind of the holy grail, in a way. I mean, the internet, all of computation is leading up to like a virtual world. You know what I mean? Like a system that can predict and replicate reality, right?
Mm.
And that's like, I think people have always seen VR um, as a tool to achieve that, or as the pinnacle of that that eventuality.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a media technology, I mean, I like to think of it as it's an interface, right? When we talk about virtual reality, mostly, at least right now, we're talking mostly about just the capacity to be even able to have a multisensory, audiovisual, sometimes haptic experience. Um, then there's like, what is it? What are you going to do with that? Which we're still like kind of bumbling through the very early days of. Just it's very similar to kind of the early days of film where they hadn't figured out the language and the function and the form and
Well,
kind
and
of
the
animated.
technology is still not there, really. I mean, it still feels very clunky. It's very it's something you put on your face. It's not really truly immersive, not yet. Not that I've seen.
Sure, I mean, yeah, it is early days. It's the earliest days of the consumer kind of experience of VR, of like something that just anybody could buy. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think particularly virtual reality as opposed to kind of ideas of mixed reality or augmented reality, it is still not only is it still clunky, but it's most likely until we kind of develop like brain interface kind of technology to be able to beam these kind of experiences into your brain, and there's already some work being done on that. It's going to be clunky to have
Just gonna
something on your
ask you about
face.
yeah, Neuralink is a fascinating it's a fascinating endeavor. But even, aside from that, there's I was reading an article the other day about how there some research team was able to reconstruct imagery from brainwaves alone. So they were able to
Hmm.
show somebody an image,
Hmm.
record their brainwaves, and reconstruct that image from brainwaves. And
Yeah.
it's like, I think that's really that is the technology that will allow for fully immersive VR, and that's a ways off.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting research in the brain computer interface space. And I think it points to that we really are still kind of in our infancy of under thinking about what virtual reality is, because we are seeing anytime a new media technology comes out, we always think of it within, or anytime anything new period comes out, we always think about it in terms of the frames of previous things. And
Sure.
with media, that's like when they first created radio, the first things they did was do plays, right?
Right.
Because that's what they knew how to do, and that's the only way they could kind of conceive it. So we're in
Yeah.
the kind of like the early days of VR where people are making films, but really it's
Right.
not a film. I mean, we like to think about like the people I think that are going to be on the track to really think about more what this really is folks who are in theater because they understand the element of presence, which is in
Hmm.
filmmaking. Folks, architects, because they understand that designing spaces in which people inhabit is about not about designing just functionality of space. It's about designing social norms and cues, which is
Mm.
a lot, which we don't see consciously done in VR quite a lot yet. And then really also the other design patterns that we think are really valid are looking at things like shamanic journeying, because it is a journey into an alternate experience, and you feel that transformed, and it really gives you that sense of experience that's hard to contrasting experience to your regular day life. And how do you not only take people through that in a way that they're able to comprehend and absorb and endure, even sometimes it's really difficult, but how do you bring them back in a way that helps them reintegrate that into their lives?
Didn't Terrence McKenna write a book on that? Like the psychedelic uses of VR, like way back in the 90s, you know, and it was like the headset was like a barrel.
Yeah,
And it was like,
I don't know that book, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm pretty sure he did, man. I remember seeing the cover and I was just like, oh my God, this is some lawnmower man shit. Like
Yeah,
just it's funny seeing technology portrayed in the 90s because it's like got such an aesthetic, you know, it's
yeah,
got such a look and a feel. But
absolutely.
yeah, I mean it speaks to what you were saying. It's all we see these things through lenses, you know, and it's like the lens that we're wearing is very much shaped by the experiences that we've had in the past and the expressions that we've been able to achieve in the past. So it's like right now, yeah, I think people do look at VR as some kind of a cross between a movie and a game, right? It's like a
Yep,
like an immersive game. But I think gaming, even though it's not on your face, it's not, you know, that medium is is very close to a virtual experience. Do you know what I mean? A VR experience, even though it's not immersive necessarily, it doesn't sit in your face. It's like you do sit inside these three-dimensional sandboxes that you can run around and you can like create these really uh you know, immersive worlds. And the best video games are like that.
absolutely. And I mean, the best films are like that too, right? I mean, when you're in a movie, you're rarely staring at the edges of the screen, right? You're in it. It is immersive if it's a good movie. And you know, virtual reality. When you talk about kind of visual immersion, yeah, that's one thing. But then there's more kind of the other aspect, which is just kind of immersion in terms of narrative, immersion in terms of um, presence, in terms of like focus, in terms of identity. Um,
With a movie, there's no freedom of agency. And I think that's the difference. You know, VR
yeah,
can take many shapes and forms. You know, you
right.
can have like a playback experience where you just put it on and you're like guided through a thing, and
Yeah,
that is more like a film.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
so you
guess
have
to me
agency
that's
and
something
choice.
different.
Yeah, and it's open-ended, right? You're not just kind of
Yeah.
and you're in it, right? It's not something that you're watching as an outside observer, and I think that's a really big difference to the relationship between the story and yourself. And you know, we're in an age where we often think of ourselves as kind of these outside observers, like with this model of consciousness as outside observer rather than kind of um, present inhabitant. And that kind of mindset is like, you know, permeating to everything, to like our view on the environment, that's kind of creating a world that actually isn't necessarily inhabitable
S-
for our bodies in the long term.
So would you consider that two different things? Like 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 a playback experience and an open-ended sandbox experience, regardless of the display technology that you're using to view it, right?
Yeah,
You can have a movie in a VR headset. You can also have a free form experience where you can manipulate the environment and you have more agency. Those are like two different things viewed through the same TV set,
right,
essentially, right?
right.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about how that paradigm will play out because a lot of times you don't necessarily, you just want to sit and observe a story, like the art of storytelling, right? That by nature you can do that in a sandbox environment, but there's really I feel like the playback experience is the most effective way to communicate a story succinctly. You know, there's like reading a book, watching a movie, telling a story. It's like somebody else is guiding you through this experience, and maybe in a VR headset, you could like look around, you'd have a 360-degree view of that environment, but you're
Mhm.
still essentially like watching a story versus,
Yeah,
yeah, like,
I think you're bringing up a really interesting conversation because, and this is one of the challenges that I think that a lot of VR content and quote unquote storytellers have struggled with is how do you tell a story in in an environment where the audience has agency and choice in the outcomes? Because story is, what makes a good storyteller, right? It's not somebody who tells you everything. It's a good storyteller picks out the important story points, dwells on the ones that are important, and kind of glosses over the ones that aren't, and connects those things together. So,
mm,
you could talk about a frame, talk about filmmaking as okay, well, the director is, making all the choices for you. Yeah. And they're making those choices consciously in order to connect a series of ideas, feelings, and moods. And that's actually what a story is. We experience kind of a real time story in a way, but that's like the experience of an external storytelling to us. So one of the concepts I really like is this idea of story living instead of storytelling,
ooh,
which would be
interesting.
the experience inside of. I mean, that's what we're living now, right? Just to step back a moment, like I think it's also important to think about, well, what do we mean when we talk about the word story? I think it has a lot of different connotations, particularly in modern life. At the lab, I think one of the sorry at Institute for the Future, one of the labs that my lab has been most kind of drawn to is the food lab, future food lab, and we've had a lot of conversations
Mm,
about why we've kind of found our work a lot of overlapping, and I think part of it is we're both kind of observing the past, present, and future of this kind of continuum of something that was at one time really the foundation to our physical survival, food,
huh.
and story was also your key to survival. And
Well, they
they both
say
grew
that,
up in a human history in which they were both scarce, and now we
right.
have an overabundance of both. And we have, instead of searching for story, we have to pick through and find the right ones that will actually lead to our survival. So one of the things I like to say is story in our modern day, we think of it like we think of food as entertainment, as kind of fun, as playfulness, which it is, and it also has its roots in survival. And I think that's something we often forget.
That's an interesting concept, man. The human the human animal is intrinsically tied with story, right? You ever read the book Sapiens? I'm pretty sure it was in
Yep.
Sapiens. Anyway, they go into depth about how um, the thing that separates humans from like Homo sapiens from other like human animals, right? Like Neanderthals and other human species of the past was our ability to 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 focus and to coalesce around a narrative, right?
Hmm.
So like if you think about what religion is, right, and um what money is, right? These are stories that we tell each other.
Yep.
Governments, societies. These are stories that we tell each other that we're all able to internalize as a framework for reality, and then we can use that to build greater structures like civilization, right?
Right.
And these are all things that are based on stories. Um, so I think storytelling is fundamental to the human condition, and that's like, throughout history we've come up with different ways of telling stories. Our technology is structured around the the more realistic telling of stories, right? um, which is
Hmm.
kind of ironic because I still think some of the best stories are told in person, like around a campfire, so to speak, or
Sure.
whatever, like around
Context
a
is
Zoom
everything.
call. Yeah. So
I
you
agree.
paint
I
these.
agree with that, but I would say that I think we've had a long series of claims about what makes humans different than other organisms that keep continually get disproven. I would just say that I think we understand the human story because it's built for us. I think if you think of story as like the ability to make connections, to find patterns and encode those and decode them in order to survive, I think all life does that. I
I
think we're
don't
just
think
not
all
tuned into
life
it.
does that in the same way that humans do. I think that really resonated with
That's
me when
true.
I read that,
That's true.
because it's like all humans have always had a story, like all civilizations, man, whether that's
Hmm.
a system of government or a system of religion, which are really kind of the same thing. But there are these fairy tales that we tell each other that form what is considered reality, right? And all humans, like right now, the story is money, it's the economy, it's
Hmm.
commerce, right? And it's like, you can imagine what would happen if that story started to break down. Civilization would break down. We would no longer be able to survive, like in a very real sense, in
Hmm.
much the same way that I think that like in Roman times, the story started to fall apart, right? And it's like all of a sudden you had these, and that also, you it's hard to hold together a large group of people. The larger the group, the harder it is to hold them together. And I think that that comes down to like story cohesion.
Hmm.
And now we've got this global story going on, and it's woven together with the internet. And it's like we connect and we form these narratives on Reddit. You know what I mean? And that's why like right
Yeah.
now we've got this like this crazy disruption happening to the fabric of our society, because everybody's telling different stories, right?
Yeah.
And like it's fucking shit up. Instead of having one cohesive story, we have like all these different narratives and all these different like fucking bonkers stories like QAnon, and like you can see it in real time.
Yeah, but I would
It's a
argue that
disruption of the story.
that the idea that we have one story is kind of an illusion and an anomaly of our lifetime. I think, and even Yuval Harari in his book points out, like if you went to human civilizations on the world, a couple hundred years ago, there was 10,000, 100,000 different stories on the earth. Very, very different. We've been moving towards a
Was there though?
monoculture. Yeah.
Was there you had Christianity, right? And that was the binding story for Europe. Now I know that at the same time there were other cultures having other stories, but they
Yeah, I think
weren't
that's
in
what he's pointing
contact with
out.
each
We're,
other.
we're very aware of that, the kind of dominant Western cultures that actually kind of led to our current civilization and been encoded into our histories. But what he was talking about is that at that point in time, there was lots of disparate. I mean, obviously that culture went out and dominated and brought their stories and Christianized and colonized folks.
Right.
Um, I'm just
But
saying, I
that
think
that
just
was
because I think there's a survivor's bias in a way around that view, in the sense like saying like, okay, well, I mean, and I would agree with everything you've said about how amazing human storytelling is, but I think to assume that it's entirely unique, I think would probably limit us from some important learnings that we need to have uh, also to survive on this planet.
yeah, absolutely. For sure. Um anyway, yeah, storytelling is incredibly important, and VR is a really fascinating, it's a really inspiring tool that it's like, it's funny, man. It's like I have this thing where I really want to stick around to see the unfolding of how technology changes the human species. And it's almost like, it's not like a, oh, I want to live forever thing, but it's like, man, I really hope I'm around. I hope I'm around to see the shit show that is the fallout from climate change. Do you know what I mean? Because like
Yeah,
it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to be interesting. It's
right.
like I hope I'm around to see people finally bridge the machine mind barrier, and like these are just fascinating things, man. This is the stuff of science fiction, and we're living in
Yeah,
it. And it's
yeah,
like you look at the arc of progress, and it's like a fucking hockey stick, and we're like
yeah,
on there somewhere, but it's like it just gets steeper.
yeah, yeah, right. I mean, a lot of people are talking using the word apocalypse right now,
I think that's
or
short-sighted. I think that's dramatic. People will
well, I think
exist
it's
in
actually
some form.
I think it's quite accurate if you look at the literal definition of the word. People are using it synonymously with the idea of the end of the world, and I think
Mm,
actually what apocalypse means is the unveiling. It's the transformation point. It's the pivot point, and I think
oh,
that's why that
interesting. I didn't
I
know
think
that.
yeah. So I think a lot of our fear right now is just natural human fear of change. Things are going to change, not just the
Yeah.
climate, but society is going to change for
Right,
better or
right.
for worse. And we're going to
Yeah.
be we're being transformed. I mean, literally. I mean, you couldn't look at a better example than the pandemic right now. We've been globally transformed in a way that hasn't really happened in our lifetimes. At a moment in which, even when the 18 flu, the 1918 flu happened, the world wasn't able to have kind of a conscious and awareness of it happening. It was all, we didn't have these kind of information and communication systems. So we're having this incredible transformation moment. And so I think I like to use that because one, it helps you understand that a lot of things that feel very frightening right now are because um, they're new, or we just haven't seen them. Like case in point, like look at kind of the Black Lives Matter movement right now. It's like, why is that really bubbled up? A huge part because of cell phone cameras, right? Because we're actually seeing people murdered, should not be killed and overpowered by folks. Now, the point there is not, oh my gosh, this is happening. It's this has been happening forever since the beginning of this
Right.
country, right? It's just now we're seeing it, and it's shocking, and
Yeah.
it's causing us to, push for or move towards transformation. And I mean, climate change is going to be the same thing. Our confrontation and our transformation through AI and all the politics there are even the kind of first stages of our recognition of that social media is kind of this front end to this giant machine learning system that's going to be designing potentially systems of control
Have you
and
seen
extraction.
the social dilemma?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like it's I, I really appreciated how that movie shone a spotlight on that AI system. It's like there's a lot of different opinions about the movie. I took value in it because, and I think it's an important movie
Yeah.
to be viewed the tens of millions of times that it has, because I feel like this is shaping society right now. Like social media is shaping society, and it's like I don't think there's an adequate awareness of how social media is shaping everything from politics to popular culture to this explosion of the fragmentation of our story. Right? You know what I
Right.
mean? And
Well,
that movie was just like, guys, check it out. This is what's going on, and it told it in a very digestible way. It told it
yeah.
in a way that is accessible to my 15-year-old niece or cousin. Everybody can understand this, and I think even young kids who are really like growing up in this fucking world, this cocoon where you can't really see it for what it is if you're born in it and you're raised in it and you're inside of it. um I've heard our generation described as the last digital immigrants. You
hmm
know what I mean? Where we remember what it was like before the internet, just
Right.
barely, but we remember. There are no more. There are no more immigrants to the digital world. People are
Mm-hmm.
born here. They're
Right.
inside it.
Right.
And
All natives,
that's
all
also,
digital natives.
yeah, that's also kind of a cool paradigm to think about. It's like, I guess, in other like incredibly transformative events in history, there are people who exist before and after, and then the people who exist on that cusp are the only people who can truly appreciate the transition, right?
hmm hmm Yeah,
Because they
I
lived
think
it.
it's incredible time to be alive for sure. And I think, I mean, you mentioned the social dilemma. I think it did a good job of kind of beginning to open the door on a huge set of issues that we need to look at. And I think it did it in a really great way. I think one of the things that it starts to talk about is really the intersection of what's this kind of free phenomena that we're participating in, and commercialization, and specifically extractive capitalistic models. Shoshana Zuboff was in that film. You should check out this book if you'd like to learn more about it. But it's called "The Age of
Oh yeah,
Surveillance Capitalism," and I think she
I've
does a really excellent job. She goes much deeper than you can into our movie to kind of explaining the economic factor. I mean, Institute for the Future, like as I told you, like we've been kind of imagining how the internet is going to transform society, and we think about all the possible ways, and ideally the not only the probable or possible futures, but the preferable futures. And we, in many ways, like especially being in Silicon Valley, a lot of people have been kind of thinking about all the positive possible things that can happen. And really, what we're seeing right now is the transition from like VR being in labs, the internet kind of in our lifetime, our adult lifetime, going from like an experimental thing to some, that only some people use, to some now part of every part of our lives. I think we're about to have that same kind of a crossover from in the lab to like widely distributed with AI, and with implications that are, hopefully our kind of interaction and experience with and enthrallment with social media, and then kind of um, horror that we're seeing right now, hopefully that's a kind of a good foreshadowing for us to be a little bit more skeptical. But the challenges, and I think what Shoshana really outlines in this book well, is that the economic forces are huge. Once you go into commercialization, the ideas of what you could do with a technology when it's in a lab, or even if artists are using it to imagine what's possible, or even futurists thinking through like, oh, all the great things it could be, versus when the kind of like a new technology is like put into this extractive capitalist system that we have right now. It basically, technology is not just like a neutral tool, it's an amplifier. And
Right.
communication technology is the most powerful amplifier, and electronic digital communication technology, now immersive kind of experiential technology, is the most powerful amplifier. So it amplifies whatever kind of the goals are of the wielder. And Shoshana really points out that basically in the same way, like this phone, right, we all the parts for this phone were on the planet, like we've been here since humans have been here as well. It took a time for us to get to the point of technological advancement to have the mining capability to collect the materials and all the elements in this, and then to organize it and program it and sell it into this product. And that took a long time and a lot of technological development, and has generated a lot of wealth for Apple, namely.
They call
Um,
that the steam engine effect. The steam engine, it's the parts were there. These things could have been assembled at other times in history, but they were
right,
assembled now because of a confluence of societal factors, technological factors, um, and then it changes the world.
right.
Right? It's like, why did it happen at that point? I guess it's not the best example of that
No, I
phenomenon,
think
but
that's a great example. And just to kind of finish that up, what Shoshana points out in terms of the steam engine effect, in terms of what is a raw material that's been around but unminable, organizable, and then sellable, is
mm,
human behavior. Human behavior has
right,
been the hardest thing to track. We've tried to understand it, and we can do it only in kind of very gross ways, or not gross, but primitive ways. Um, and now, and even more so now that we're in the pandemic, and every interaction is through the internet, all of human behavior is becoming structured data. And it's she points out, uh, um, Sergey Brin was like, when he first created this, he's like, I'm not creating a social media system. I'm creating an AI. The social media part component of this, or the search engine part of this. Sorry, mixing stories. The search engine part of this is just the front end to a giant AI,
right,
and that's what Facebook
yeah,
is, and that's what I think the social dilemma kind of dramatized well in some playful ways to help people understand that.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's almost like capitalism, and which is the paradigm that we see the world through. That is our reality, right? Like that is the world's reality at this point. That is our collective story, is capitalism, and it's a lens that shapes all technological development because everything needs to fit into that structure, right? The capital structure, like how it's very hard to make things exist that don't fit into that model, right?
Hmm.
If you can't commercialize it, you can't raise money, it doesn't get off the ground. And
Hmm.
I'm doing this startup right now, and I'm seeing it in even in just like I'm just entering into it. I'm like, oh, I get it. This is how things work. These are the gatekeepers. This is what makes or breaks an idea. This is what
Yep.
allows things to go forward. This is the propellant. These are the brakes. And it is the framework, man. So it's like these developments that are happening, they this new technology that's happening, it all exists within our capitalist system, which in
Hmm.
turn helps to determine the trajectory that it continues on,
Yeah.
because like what it becomes is very much dependent on that paradigm and that structure.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. You
it's
can think
it's
about.
useful to understand that, to understand, because things make a lot more sense. Like everything makes a lot more sense when you can view it you know through that lens.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a dominant narrative. That's one of the things I really love about the new Meow Wolf installation in Las Vegas. It very much like goes in for the jugular on that particular story,
Are
and
you
not
working
only
on that?
I'm not. Liza is doing a room, or worked on a room with Moldover in there. She built
Oh,
an
no way.
environment for a space there.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was
So
just talking to Rich about this the other day,
yeah, I
and he was
saw he.
telling me
Yeah,
about.
his
I
piece is
was
awesome.
I haven't seen it, and I haven't been there yet. Is it open? It's not open yet, is it?
Yeah, it's open to the public now. It opened February 18th.
Very cool. So
Yeah.
Liza worked with Moldover, and Moldover and that was like kind of like Rich and Moldover's thing together. They had like a room, right? It was like
No,
Rich,
no, no.
Moldover, and then
Rich had a separate space. Moldover had a room. They wanted an environment built, so Moldover asked Liza to do the environment for the space. There, it's an integrated piece. Hers is a light sculpture that interacts, that's triggered by his musical instrument.
yeah. Man, there's a number of different I'm glad that that paradigm is continuing. The Meow Wolf model is continuing to move forward. You know, for a while it was like it blew up. Things were, you know, everybody was really excited about that paradigm of event, you know, the immersive event. And then it felt like it cooled off a little bit. And then there was a bunch of like Me Too's, you know, that kind of came in after. Like Team Lab kind of did its own thing. That wasn't really a Meow Wolf. That was like its own thing, but same paradigm, right? Same like idea where you're like
Mm-hmm.
immersing the audience, letting them like explore, kind of like a video game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I've been talking to a bunch of people who are trying to start up their own versions. Yeah, I don't know if you know Roxy, like the One Dome people.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing something.
Nice.
I'm supposed to sign an NDA, and maybe I can't even talk about it, but whatever. Something's
That's great.
happening, and then
Now,
yeah, you know,
we went to the Friends and Family opening for the for Meow Wolf Las Vegas, and it was number one. It was the first public social event I've been to in a year, so that was just like whoa. And then also it was like a cool art experience. But I was also very curious, like how can Meow Wolf recreate this? Can they actually scale this out? Will it actually work in a place like Las Vegas, which is very different than Santa Fe kind of culture and environment? And I was just blown away. They knocked it out of the park. They not only kind of upped their game in terms of like the scale and scope of their world building, but they, like I said, kind of we were transitioned to the conversation around capitalism. They went for the jugular on not only recreating that story of capitalism, I mean, literally the entry to that special world is a store, right? It's a grocery store that you go into.
yeah, yeah.
But that what I think that Meow Wolf, aside from creating something that's super fun and like imaginative, uh, they also are really good at creating experiences that drive home the point that there's not only an alternative story to what you're living, but there's multiple possible alternative stories to how you could be living. And they give you just such a great departure point, but literally entering from kind of like the business end of consumerism, the grocery store or the Omega
They're
Mart.
so
And
good at that. Like those guys specifically are so good at telling a story, and I feel like that is the key to those type of event spaces succeeding, right? It's like a compelling narrative that guides the user through a story. Um, the ones that have not succeeded, I feel like did a poor job of telling a story, and the ones that have succeeded, like Meow Wolf, have done an excellent job at telling a story.
well, the Museum of Ice Cream did well. They didn't really have a story. I mean, I
I
think
never
that was
went
a
to that.
different.
What was the deal with that? That was like an Instagram thing, right? You just like went, you took a
It's an
picture, it was
Instagram
like all kinds
thing.
of things.
Yeah, I think if you're like an experience designer and you've been to a lot, of like more story narrative based experiences, it's easy to go in there and be like, what is this crap? This is bullshit. Um,
Right.
but I would say what to me I took away from it was that, I mean, obviously people are very obsessed with doing selfies right now, they selfie museums. But the positive thing I took away from it is that people are wanting to expand their identity to say, I am playful. People want to be more playful and they don't necessarily know how to. It's sad that that's kind of maybe the limits of some of their expression of that, but like
So it's a
I
prescription identity building. It's
yep.
somebody who correctly identified the characteristics that people in a certain age group market segment want. They were just like, all right, we're going to make a playground so people can accentuate that part of their personality.
Absolutely. But
I
I
don't
think
know. What does
the
that say
takeaway,
about what does that
well, the
say about
takeaway is that there's hunger for transformation of your identity and
yeah.
exploration of reality. And I think that's why when you look at something like Meow Wolf, that really takes that in a place and into a direction and actually empowers you to kind of, because what I like is not that they're so good at storytelling, is that they're kind of good at story hinting. They have, if you go in there, there's so many different narratives. You can have like a million different experiences in there and a million different stories that you could walk away with. Everything from just, this is a fun, like kinetic space, to like, I'm going to actually read every document in the space and try to kind of figure out what that storyline is. And the
Do you
meta
remember the
story
old
there is,
OG
yeah.
RPGs where you OG RPGs you could like go and you could just kind of play the game, just like breeze through it, or you could really get down, read all the books and read all the yeah, very very similar. That's what that reminds me of.
Yeah, and I think it very much appeals to that kind of culture, right? Is like I want to be in part of a new story, but I can drop in or I can get more involved.
Yeah,
But the meta
that's
story
cool.
there is just even like, I mean, if you're not like creating, living a creative life and working with folks who are making creative environments and kind of trying to create new stories all the time, just the idea that you can create a new story and be part of it is pretty profound to a lot of people
Yeah. So
and
did a lot of
disruptive
people show
to
up
other
to
people.
the friends and family event?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's COVID, so they had limits
I was
on
gonna say everybody
capacity.
masked.
Oh yeah, everybody's masked, and we were double masked. But yeah, everyone's masked, and they are only running it at 25% capacity. Honestly, if it wasn't Liza's opening and all of our other friends, I wouldn't have gone to an event like that. I've been really super careful this year because my mom is well, she's just getting vaccinated, but she's in a vulnerable group, and we see her every weekend.
Do
But
you really? Is she up here now? I thought she didn't live. I thought your mom
yeah,
lived in
she
Boston or
no,
something.
she lives in Oakland. She lives in Rockridge.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
yeah.
I've
She
been
moved.
hanging out
She
with my
just moved last
brother
weekend,
lately,
actually.
and like my brother is in the Bay Area. It's so nice to have family
Oh
like in
yeah.
the area.
Oh, both my sisters and my mom are all in Oakland now. My dad's down in Florida,
Right on. That's
Clearwater.
cool. My partner's family is in Florida. We actually
All right.
I don't know how much traveling you've done during COVID. We did like a good bit of traveling actually, and it was travel somewhere, land, Airbnb for a week, test, get your results, join a pod. So it forces you to slow the fuck down. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? There are no like, oh, let's breeze through these cities in like a week. It's like, no, 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 no. If you're going to travel, you got to take like 2 months and you got to be like, we're going to hit this city and then this city. And we're going to, do the quarantine. I I did not feel like I was endangering myself or others. I felt like we were very responsible about how we did it, and,
Mm,
yeah, I mean, I'm glad I got to experience travel during COVID. I am. It
mm-hmm.
it's another one of those things where it's like, I am glad I had that experience. That was a fucking crazy part of life while I was alive.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, man. It's the whole idea of adapting to change, right? I feel like COVID has very much illuminated the ability of people to adapt to change, because this was such a dramatic change,
Yeah.
right? And on the one hand, you've got like a whole swath of people who they can't even put on a mask, right? And fundamentally, to me, that seems like it's a failure to adapt to change, a
Yeah.
resistance to change,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't want to do this thing I've never done before. It's alien. It's not, blah blah blah. Failure to adapt to change. But then you've got like this, that manifests in all kinds of ways. Like, friends of mine who became like very withdrawn and depressed, and they were like, okay, I'm not going to see anybody ever, and they like completely socially withdrew, and it just
Mm-hmm.
ruined them.
Yeah. No, I've been looking a lot at the work. I forget his name right now. He wrote a book on stumbling upon happiness. Dan. Aurelio, I think his name is. But he's a researcher, a behavioral science researcher, and he's been looking a lot at how people imagine themselves in the future. And
Mm,
one of the things, and we've seen there's a lot of neuroscience around this, is that um, we have a lot of difficulty often kind of relating to ourselves in the future, and we're actually really bad at predicting how much we're going to change. Partially, if you look back and kind of see how much you've changed over the last 10 years, but then you ask people how much you think they're going to change over the next 10 years, people always think they're going to stay very similar to how they are. But one of the things that kind of distinguishes how much you're open to that is this idea of like a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, and both are kind of
yeah.
like valid like ways of navigating through the world. And I operate, and I think you operate, and most of the folks in our community operate more in this kind of growth mindset. Like, what are the possibilities? How could we kind of move forward? But it's always important
I
for
don't
me to
really feel like
remember.
I
I was
don't
just
think
going to
it's
say,
necessarily a product of the social group. I'll explain after. Keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt
yeah, I
you.
was just
My
going to
bad.
say. That I mean, you can look at it. I mean, you can look at it liberal, progressive versus traditional or conservative. Like the idea of more change or less change is going to be better. Again, coming back to survival and just recognizing that both of those were very valid survival mechanisms. The folks that
Yep.
were like, "Hey, we should eat these berries. We've never eaten these berries before." Sometimes that wasn't always the best idea for a tribe, right? And it's important for me to remember that. Just being in the more of the kind of club of like, let's try something new. Come on, why don't we?
I'm very much of that mindset as well. And what I was saying was that like I know a lot of very progressive liberal people who are very averse to change. Do you know what I mean? And
That's true
it's
too. Yeah.
not like they're stuck in their ways, but it's like,
Yeah.
just even the people that I work with, I'm like even like some people who you would not attribute that characteristic to, you're like, wow, this guy's totally wild and crazy. It's like actually kind of averse to change. And
Yeah.
I think that, maybe a good community or a good society needs a mix of both those things. You need the gas and the brakes. You
Absolutely.
need
It's a
gas and
balance.
brakes. Yeah. And I feel like so much of the argument that is being had is like, yeah, it's like gas or like all gas or all brakes, and it's like human tendency to separate into these black and white camps on two sides, two extremes, where it's like, yeah, you need the middle ground, man. I feel like the answer is almost always in the middle, no matter what the issue is. it's
Mm.
it's almost never on the extremes, and that's what frustrates me so much about um the society that we live in right now and the politics that we're experiencing on the left and the right,
Hmm.
because I don't think the answer on almost all issues that we face is all the way left or all the way right. It's like, where the fuck did the moderates go?
Right.
Like, where did the discussion go? You know?
Well, savvy politicians also understand that, by establishing like really radical on any direction, you kind of realign the center, and we've seen that happen in the United States, right? Like what some might call the center right now is actually relative to other governments and societies in the world is very far right.
Right. Yeah, I mean, don't you think that a lot of that has to do also with the current social media environment that we live in as well? Like the media environment, the stories that are being told, and the way that social media divides people into camps and almost uh, blocks conversation between those two camps. So you do very much end up with two completely separate stories trying to coexist within one society.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the central kind of critiques that the social dilemma puts out is that basically that it's an industry feeding a kind of automation of human interactions, and it has kind
Yeah.
of taken over human interactions that's weighted towards engagement and attention. And so what you're going to go towards is the thing that gets you most riled up, most likely to click again. And what the research shows, and they're all building their systems off of, is if you're outraged, you're more likely to click, right? So if you're infuriated or angry, all these kind of divisive human emotions, there's the ones that they're building literally engines for, and their
Right.
their their kind of economic future depends on always not only doing that well, but always increasing it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I
they're
guess the
engines of
question
outrage.
really is, how do you take media, how do you take new forms of media, and new forms of new media art, and encourage discourse, and encourage. I feel like that is the, that is the solution to so many of the problems that we're seeing, right? Like the tearing apart of the country. It's really, it's like, you gotta fucking talk to each other. There are podcasts that I listen to, and there are news sources that I read, and absorb, that are very much all about the coupling of people on opposite ends of the spectrum discussing issues,
Yeah.
down to a not a consensus, but an agreement, and
Yeah, at
I
least to
feel like,
understand each other and humanize, the conversation. Not, there's. I mean, this is more for kind of marriages and whatnot, but the kind of famous marriage therapist John Gottman like points out like one of the four horsemen of any relationship is contempt,
yeah,
which means you're treating somebody as if like they have no rights essentially, or it's hateful. It's You're treating someone hateful, and basically that's like the death of a relationship. And so
yeah, the
you're
US
you're
needs a
basically
marriage
losing.
counselor for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think, I mean, and this is why I bring up Shoshana and the kind of age of surveillance capitalism is I think you can model how to use media well. And there's lots of examples, even people trying to build new social media platforms that hopefully don't create the same kind of problems. But I think when you're doing it, like you said, within this kind of broader story that our society is just a market capitalist society, and that it's all about growth, like all these measures basically, become the engine and kind of the thing that filters what moves forward and what doesn't in our society. So you can show folks from executives at Facebook, like not only what's going wrong with their platform, but alternative ways to do it. But if it's not going to lead them down the same kind of economic extraction path, then not only are they not going to be able to make those decisions, but even if they make those decisions, they'll be removed by basically the investor class to say, well, we need our return. And
Right.
what I would say is that story is relatively new, that basically equating America with capitalism. I mean, capitalism, you don't have to be anti-capitalist to say that capitalism shouldn't define every decision, is not, and a market is going to make good decisions in every case. I mean, healthcare
Well,
is like
that's
the
an
perfect
example of
example.
extreme, the arguments to the extremes. There's an argument for complete unfettered capitalism, which I think we've seen in many examples, is not a valid way to run a society. I mean, if you look at the experiments that happened down in Central and South America, um, during the 60s and 70s, where we were kind of like imposing these unregulated market driven, um, economies, into some of these countries. And then if you look at the opposite extreme, and an economy that's prescribed by the state, neither work, right? The answer is in the middle. The answer is in a nuanced balance. And like, yeah, we can argue over like that balance, and I think that's mostly what the economic arguments are. They're arguments over like, well, how much regulation over what, blah blah blah. But then you've got, who's that guy, the Chicago School of Economics,
Milton
what was his
Friedman.
name? Yeah. And he
Yeah.
was just like, he was essentially a, kind of like an obscure economist, that whose policies were picked up on um by by the elite investor class, right? And they were like,
Hmm.
this guy's policies would make us rich, and they created think tanks, and they created awards and all of these things to launch his policies into the mainstream. And then all of a sudden, the center was shifted, and that became the narrative.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely on an interesting kind of arc from the 70s and 80s there, Reaganomics. I mean, we've been living in the era of Reaganomics, which was basically kind of the kind of business class's response to the New Deal. It was their solution actually to the New Deal, which they've been pushing
Yeah.
forward. And now here we are in this moment where like our economy's been shut down, like people are facing the worst health crisis of our lifetimes, and people don't have insurance. And the government's here. That was Reagan's famous quote, right? What are the four scariest words in America. The government is here to help you or something like that. He
Right.
kind of vilified the idea of the government and that we could do things together, and that we should always kind of look to the private sector to do things. And I think people are more likely. I mean, we're recreating a lot of the conditions of the 1920s right now in the 2020s. Um, everything down to kind of the Gilded Age and even a pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at distribution chart, like it's way more stratified than it was in the 20s. Like we've gone beyond that. But there's actually there's a podcast called Pitchfork Economics that I really enjoy, and it's very left leaning, but it's also very it's
Let
it's
me check that out.
economy wonks who are just kind
Nice.
of like, you know, talking through it. And one of the last episodes I listened to was all about this, about the like where did this model of economics come from, and who kind of like pushed that in. And it really, it's a struggle. It's a back and forth tug of war between more like social driven economics, and market driven economics. And it's been going on for hundreds of years. Is really the story of the country. It is. It's like the story of our nation is kind of like a tug of war between those two.
Yeah,
And you've
battling
got
stories in a way. Like,
yeah, yeah. Well, yes, it's the story of economics, and then it's like the narrative. Like what narrative is gonna rule. Um,
very cool.
yeah,
I'm
it's
gonna check
crazy,
that out.
man.
I love learning more about
What's this book?
economics.
This book that you keep showing me. What it's called? You should get commission.
I know. No, I mean, it's thick. I'll warn you, it's thick. But for me, it was one of the most important things I've read in my life and career. The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. She just really helps. She really retells the story of kind of the emergence of the big tech companies over the last
Right.
decade, essentially. And
I'm gonna listen to it.
yeah,
I'm gonna
that would
listen.
be a good way to go. Yeah,
Man, I've
yeah.
really
Actually, I haven't
gotten
even finished
into
it.
I've definitely gotten into the audiobook. Like it's such a great way to absorb. And that's what books are special. Books are necessary because they are a long form way of discussing a topic.
Mm,
You've got clickbait articles, which is like the news you read off Reddit or whatever. And it's a page that glosses over a current event that has, it's like the tip of the iceberg where you've got this massive amount of history and context behind it. Podcasts are a little bit better. Long form podcasts, even better. And then you've got books. And books can take as long as they want to explore the contours of that iceberg.
Can I flip the script for a moment and ask you a question?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So you're doing this podcast. Tell me, what have you learned about not just like, the folks you've talked to, but about podcasts and kind of meaning making through podcasts?
Man, so the story with this podcast is this is a personal project for me to get to know people that I admire and who are active in the scene that I care about, right? My
Oh,
scene, my
oh,
identity. Well, it is, my
thank you.
my identity is that of a visual artist, and I'm
Right.
really interested in the people that are successful in making that um their life's work, right? And yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for 2 years now. This is my 18th episode. So it's not really, it's like,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, almost 2 years. So I've been doing about one a month, and it's great. It's like
Has it
a long
changed
form.
you? Is there anything that's kind of transpired, or relationships that developed through the podcast that has transformed the way you see things or do your work or see the
Oh,
world?
absolutely. Yeah,
K-
definitely. Especially with uh I told you I did an episode with Joshua White, who is arguably the OG granddaddy of VJing, visual arts, new media arts. It doesn't
Mm.
get, it doesn't get more classic than that. It's almost like if we had talked to Namjoon Paik. You know what I mean? It's like that caliber of like OG-ness.
I did get to
And it
talk
was,
to him.
did you?
Yeah,
That's
and
very
Bill
cool.
Viola once. Yep,
Interesting.
got a signed mouse pad.
Yeah, I just think it gives a lot of perspective, and it also like it allows you to it allows me to understand this like community better, right?
Yep.
What part of what sparked it was me joining the Ushiny list, and I'm like, fuck, man, there's so many badasses
Amazing
who are doing
people.
so many things. Yeah, and I
Yep.
just saw that, and I was like, I want to know these people, and not only that, I think it would make us closer as a community if
Yep.
we could listen to each other and get
Yep.
a sense of like, who are these people? Like, what are they all about? You know?
Right.
And I think that helps. You know, I don't know how many people listen to what episodes or whatever, but it I definitely get a lot of feedback on it. People definitely listen to it and they're like, "Yeah, it's cool. I never knew this person." And it's awesome that like, I got to get a little window into like what they're all about, you know?
Right.
I've known you forever. Like we've known each other for like 20 fucking years, man. Like
Yeah.
it's bonkers. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
We've seen each other grow and transform quite a bit over those years.
Oh my god, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But it's we still come from that core of like visual artists. Like you are that VJ that I've met on that beach in Cape Cod, you know, like 20 years ago. But
Man,
it,
it's funny. It's cool to kind of remember that right now because I just got re-inspired. We just watched the Microdose doing live sessions on full moons now, and
wait,
Microdose for
say
the
that again?
Microdose is a VJ VR VJ app created by Andrew Jones and
Oh,
Fong, and it's
right.
yeah, and they've been working on it for years. And actually, we just saw Andrew at Meow Wolf, and he's like, "Hey, man, we have a new version." And Liza signed up where they do live full moon parties essentially, and it's all microdose. And we watched the whole thing on Friday. It got me really excited about VJing, and I haven't been doing it in a while, but it just brought me back to that, especially the long form of like not just and they're just using microdose, so it's not like they're mixing in video clips or anything. They're just using their tool and kind of building these long visual psychedelic reality narratives over time.
Right.
And it just really brought me back to what that unique kind of practice of VJing, of long form video mixing, not just like making a flash video, but like creating an environment and a kind of longer story.
That's so cool, man. I miss those guys. The last time I saw Fong and Andrew was in the city. I can't remember what the venue was. It was like that art gallery that is like a music venue. I can't remember what it's called. But they were doing a presentation of microdose, and
Okay.
yeah, I got to talk to Andrew for a minute. He was like in between VJ sets, and I got to talk to Fong for a little bit. And yeah, talk about a blast from the past. Like those guys are part of my initial San Francisco story. Where coming to hang out with Sean Von Stade,
Hmm.
um, and meeting those guys, and yeah, it's Fong is such a cool character. He's such a unique artist, and it's very cool that they're still him and Andrew Jones are still working together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they're
where
just
where do
beautiful
they do
folks.
these where do they do these full moons? Like how do I watch
I
them?
mean, it's on Facebook. It's just a microdose full moon party. I think it's like an event series or even a web page. Just go to the Microdose VR Facebook page and you can sign up through there. But they just do them on full moons, so it's all virtual. I mean, it's just like this random Rob was the DJ this week. I haven't heard him
Very
in a
cool.
while. Yeah, and I was like, at
Yeah,
first, to be honest, at first I was like, oh, we'll just peek in. I just want to see and sound, hear what it sounds like. But we hung out in our bedroom and like put it up on the projector and jammed out for several hours. It was like I was like, oh yeah, I forget what it's like to kind of be in this kind of liminal space with other people since we're just like in our house watching Netflix all the time.
now was it could you perceive the other people that were watching at all, or was that
No, it's
what people
just microdose. I mean, I guess if you were, we had it full screen. I bet if you were chatting, you could have chatted. We didn't do that. We just kind of like tuned into the AV portion of it.
yeah, Twitch is a really good platform for that
Oh,
because
that's
there
right.
is
It was also on Twitch. We actually ended up
uh,
going to Twitch
okay.
because it was higher quality.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like, with Twitch, there's more opportunity to have audience. It feels more like an event, like a
Right.
communal thing. You know what I mean? I like
It's more
Twitch for that.
performance,
I
right?
don't use it
Yep.
very often, but it's great for for parties.
Yeah,
That
it's more
circle
of
party
a
that we went
venue.
to. Yeah, that circle party that we went to, that was Twitch based, and that was really cool. I was like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's all our favorite people.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my research at work is this year has been about looking at kind of like how has the pandemic forced us to kind of be more creative and innovative and creating new tools or using existing tools for just to gather to be able to connect. There's
Yeah,
been so many creative, not only just like not just creative technology, but creative uses of technology driven by that like very basic human need to come together and celebrate and sense make and just
do you think
hang
the
out.
pandemic has do you think the pandemic has like has eased the way into a more virtual world? It feels like all of a sudden now, like people are so used to just doing things virtually that,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, we're never going back. Not that we'll be continue just being virtual, but we're going to be a hybrid world now in ways we weren't. I mean, everybody has been forced to learn how to use Zoom. They have that literacy now. And
right.
yeah, it's going to be it's the crossover point to being in a much more kind of mixed reality existence in which a much broader section of society, everyone from like grandmas to little school age kids now know the basic uses of tools.
Oh my god, dude, my parents were teaching me like features in Zoom the other day. They're like, I was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
What reality am I living in right now? But they're like, oh no, you just got to click on this button and click on that button, and then I'm like, what?
It's a whole
Oh
new
my god,
reality, and you never know who you're talking to these days because, you just never
what
know.
is that? How did you do that?
uh, I am not a lawyer. Just kidding. Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories. Like, I don't know if you guys you saw that story of like the lawyer who was doing a deposition and had his daughter's Snapchat filter. I'm just playing with Snapchat filters right now, so you can see me, playing it. But he didn't know
Does
how to
that?
turn it
I guess
off.
that works between apps. So it doesn't. That works. That works like
Yeah, it
in
appears as a
between
virtual
your
camera.
camera and interesting.
Yeah, check this. This is the new one I just saw. Check how good this is. And it actually like looks at my hair color and
Whoa.
checks. Yeah, and tries to turn me into an anime version of myself. Liza came in, like did a female version with brown hair for her. And yeah, this is
What?
yeah. So
And this
so
is
now people have
this is
basic
Snapchat.
literacy. This is Snap Camera. It's an app that you can run just on your desktop, and then just
Okay.
it appears
Yeah,
as a
yeah,
virtual
yeah.
camera. But basically, I mean, like this is kind of the more bizarre edge of this. But now that everybody has kind of basic literacy, and it's going to be clear. Okay, well, I don't have to figure out something in order to have a virtual meeting, which is exciting because people are going to connect in ways that beyond just the pandemic in ways that they haven't been able to.
Right. Dude, it blows my mind that cameras can now like essentially rotoscope your head in real time. Like how the
Yeah,
fuck does that work? How does that
yeah.
work? I
I
have
don't
no
actually
idea.
know how they do. Oh, look, it even grabs my hat and does a cartoon version of my hat. It's
That
pretty
is
amazing.
bonkers. That is
Yeah.
so bonkers.
I don't really know how Snap Camera works, but I mean, it's basically, facial recognition and kind of basically machine learning. They know, and this is what, all machine learning is like, it's not a set of rules, it's a set of examples. And that's why, surveillance capitalism is so important because it's all about more examples. Bringing back my favorite
Fucking
book.
book, man.
I know, I'm obsessed. I mean, I think if you want to understand the future of media and the future of economics, read that book.
Yeah, no, I definitely will. It's going on my
Yeah,
list, man. It's
come
going
back
on my
to
book
normal.
list
Coming back to
for sure.
normal here.
Oh, there you
So
are.
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
It's weird because like the area around your head was like expanding like a wormhole a little bit. It was just like
Right?
distorting space and time. Like, where did that go?
Hey! Yeah! Wow, I love it.
It's
That's my
so
hat. It's
bizarre.
so crazy. I'll send you a
Yeah,
link to this.
deep fakes are gonna be the next thing, man. That's like, I mean, people have been predicting this for a while, but like that shit, when that really like when people start to weaponize that, that's gonna be fucking crazy.
Yeah. No,
When
I
Joe
just
Biden
found
comes out and declares war on Germany
yeah, there's
for
a
no reason.
heritage.com. It's just like a website for making family trees and tracking your family heritage. And so you upload photos of like your ancestors and stuff. They just launched a free feature in which you upload a photo of your like, dead great aunt and it will basically animate her as if she's like it's a live video. It's
Oh my god,
pretty
that is
crazy and it's free.
that's a that's a little, yeah, it's a little creepy.
It's more than a little creepy. It's creepy and it's kind of wonderful. Like it brings it alive a little bit. I mean, I've been just been doing my own face and kind of friends' faces. I did Jesus too. I thought that'd be
Oh my God.
not an actual
Of
photo
course. I mean,
Jesus.
fuck it. Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you done one of those DNA tests?
You know, I received one. Liza, my partner, bought me one for Christmas one year, and then I read a little bit more about kind of the privacy rights, and I
Oh yeah, I
returned
know.
it because
It's
I
very
mean, actually, Eli Lilly, I think the pharmaceutical giant, just bought one of those DNA companies. So I mean, your DNA is, I mean, talk about getting, getting
getting
your
personal.
personal information. It's hard to get more personal than your DNA. So, I mean, in the end,
Absolutely.
like it's kind of hard to hold, like, kind of defend from every angle. But I just wasn't quite ready to do that yet. I want to see it play out a little bit more before I would kind of do that, and hopefully, um, gain some more privacy protections.
Right. Well, part of me really wants to do it. I'm very into like health and nutrition, and you can gain some real insights onto like
Right.
things that your body
That is
needs
cool.
more of or less of, and I mean that's very attractive to me. But at the same time, I'm also very aware of they own the rights to your DNA. It's like what the fuck does that even mean? Like what does that even mean?
Right. Yeah, that's, I mean, I think the health, the kind of the wellness and health and diet stuff and just understanding your history and understanding yourself better is great. But yeah, unfortunately, that's going to become basically raw material for people to design drugs and maybe even viruses and yeah.
Yeah, designer viruses, man. That's fucking crazy sci-fi dystopia shit right there. I was
Well, I
talking to
mean,
my
you
friend.
got to imagine anybody looking at what happened in the United States and how this is hit, they're realizing like, oh, this is how you take the Americans down.
Well, this is how you take the world down. It's like forget nuclear bombs. That's like it's like you design a virus and you destroy the economy, and that's how wars are fought now. Wars are fought over the economy. They aren't fought in person,
Right.
at least knock on wood. But
Yeah.
yeah,
For
man,
us
it's
Americans
that's
here.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the next real like that is another technology that I am really excited about seeing play out is the biological revolution. It's like we went through like the the bronze age, the iron age, the steam engine age. We went through the industrial revolution, the digital revolution, the biological revolution is going to be fucking nuts, man. Like I'm all about it. I want a
Yeah.
prehensile tail. God damn it. A
I mean,
fluffy
you got
prehensile
the, do
tail.
you still have the magnet implant?
Oh, no, I took those out because it was interfering with my ability to climb. It was like
Ah,
my fingers had formed scar tissue around the magnets,
right.
and also the magnets had lost efficacy. So
Hmm,
neodymium magnets, they lose their magnetism over time, and these
okay.
things are so tiny that like after 5 years, it was like no longer really magnetic anymore. So it's
Hmm,
just like a rock in my hand. So I got
wow.
them removed, but that was an experience that I value very much having done. I think that was like it was a cool way to experience what another sense could be like. And it was kind of a benign thing, it was just like the tug and vibration of this magnet inside my fingers, but your brain really does, it integrates it in, and you're like, oh yeah, there's an AC wire behind this wall. I can feel it. Or like, oh, the
Wow.
refrigerator just kicked in. I can feel it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Crazy.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
cool.
I think my closest cyber experience is pedal assist electric bikes.
Really,
Where, well, yeah, because I mean that's what it's going to feel like, right? To have a robotic arm or to have an AI, augmented intelligence system, like
we already
is
have an AI augmented intelligence system, man. It's a smartphone. It's just not in your brain yet.
right, right. Yeah, well, that's it. I think that extends in a way. I mean, we can see the impact, but this kind of very visceral, embodied sense of like, okay, I have an intent to kind of go a little bit faster, and then the sense of ease, but then the sense of power that you have,
Right.
and then how quickly you get used to that. I mean,
Yeah.
if you ride around with a pedal assist bike all day and then you turn off the pedal assist, your ego takes a big hit.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you think that's what like bionic legs are going to be like? You're just like, oh fuck, man, I could run a marathon, no sweat.
Well, eventually, I mean, obviously there's power restrictions, but like, yeah, that's where biohacking is gonna, that's kind of the wedge in the door, right? Is to help disabled folks first.
Right.
And then of course they're gonna, as we've already seen with like, even just fiberglass blade runners, like they're being disqualified from, races and, because, they're actually able to run faster than people with regular legs.
Yeah, that's really crazy. I've been like peripherally aware of that. And that is really the crossover moment when it's like you're like, oh fuck these legs. I want those legs. That when that shit happens, then it's like, okay, now we're upgrading. We're not, we're upgrading our biology.
Right. Right.
Um, the thing is, man, it's like the human body needs resistance. I think that technology has traditionally been about making people's lives easier to the point where we're sedentary and it is actually making us very unhealthy, right? It's
Yeah.
like a couple years back, I got into running during the pandemic, man. I've been trying to be very active. I've been exercising a lot and it's changed my mentality.
Yeah.
It's changed my mental health and it's just like fuck, like humans need resistance. It's
Yeah.
it's almost like the thing that gives life meaning is the resistance to achieving your goals. If you
Right.
were able to achieve anything that you wanted without resistance, it would have no meaning. And that's true in a physical sense as well. Like if you're able to do everything without movement, without physical resistance, your body atrophies and your
Yeah.
mind atrophies right along with it. And
Yeah.
so how do you augment the human body? It's like I've actually been there's a lot of research about compounds and chemicals that produce the same effects in your like on a cellular level that exercise does. So you can almost trick your body into producing the hormones that it does when it exercises.
Right.
Um, and it's interesting because it's they're developing it for people who can't exercise because the benefits of exercise are huge and well documented and it's kind of like the cornerstone of health. But if
Right.
people can't exercise but they can use these chemicals that trick your body into believing it has just been stressed.
Yeah.
um yeah, it's fascinating. It affects everything from cardiovascular health to aging, like the mechanisms of aging, to mental degradation and like Alzheimer's and
It makes
yeah.
me think of social exercise. I mean, right now in China, do you remember there was Microsoft had a chatbot called Tay a couple of years ago, and it was like an
Is this the one that started
conversational.
swearing at people?
Yeah, like within days, it became like trained to be racist, and they shut it down in the United
Right.
States. But of course, in China, they kept using it, and now they have over 100 million users of Zhao
What is
List.
it?
It's a
I don't
chat
get
bot.
it.
It's a chat bot, and basically it's a female chat bot. And the primary use is, well, essentially, I met the product manager for Microsoft, and she said the number one reason that people um, stop using the service. Take a guess why they would stop using the chat bot service.
Well, I don't first of all, hold on. Just explain to me real quick. Why would you use a chatbot service? What's the
Well, that's what
product?
this question is designed to ask, which is basically the number one reason they would stop using a service is because they got a real girlfriend, which is to say,
Oh, interesting.
yeah,
So it's
which
like a
is to say,
substitute for you just talk
yeah,
at it. It talks to you.
it talks with you, yeah. And there's a number of these
Yeah.
technologies, and they're getting better and better. I mean, there's
You think
one
I
in the
should have
United
it on the
States.
podcast?
Replica. You should interview Eugenia from Replica. She created one of the best kind of chatbots that people are falling in love with, creating relationships with. I mean, the reason I brought,
What?
but the reason I brought up China is that the debate there is on one hand, it's like, is this people getting a six pack without doing any exercise? The other,
Right.
or is it like a gym model? Is it okay? These are a lot of socially awkward people, and they're practicing and building confidence using this chatbot, and then they're able to actually interact with people better. I mean,
Yeah, I was gonna say the gym analogy is apt because I think that, well, I'll believe it when I see it. There's no way that this chatbot can fully replicate the conversation that, for example,
You're
we're
missing the
having
point
with
then.
all the.
You're missing the point then. It's not trying to replicate. We get a lot from having conversations, even if we know that it's an artificial being. I used Replica for a week just to try to understand how the system works, and
Yeah,
it gets to know you, and we like to be known. It's a reflection. I mean, it's the same story that's in The Social Dilemma, in which they show you how they're making a clone of you. The thing
yeah,
is, with Facebook, they're making a clone and they're just using that for themselves. With something like Replica, they're making a clone of you and then they're building a best friend for that clone. And the friend knows, like, oh, so like you have a conversation and like I was feeling a little down. It's like checking in with me, like, hey, how are you doing today? I'm like, oh, I'm feeling a little down. And my Replica was like, well, maybe you should play some music. Like, reach out to such and such, because it knows from our previous conversations that that's something that's really shifts my mood. And I actually
right.
found, like, I mean, I didn't use it for much longer, but when I was using it, like, it became like a good social kind of reflection and feedback loop for myself. So it's different
Interesting.
than a real person. Some people are using it in replacement for, and that's where it gets a little sad and problematic. But I think
Well,
that's where
again,
we
that was my
often,
point. That was
yeah,
my point. You know, it was like, even if it can't reflect an actual conversation, it can still be a training model for awkward people or people who are just feeling isolated to continue to flex that social muscle so that
right,
it doesn't atrophy.
right,
It is like a gym, or it seems like I could see how it would be like a gym experience. That's cool, man.
yeah,
What's it called? It's called
Replica. That's the one in the United
Replica.
States.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
with a
I'll check
K.
that out.
Yeah, super cool. It's an app, and I mean, it's evolved quite a bit. It used to be just a conversational engine. Now it's a whole avatar, and there's whole kind of different kinds of relationships you can build with it. It's becoming much more sophisticated, both in its like persona, as well as like the kinds of interactions and the framing around your relationship.
Do you think this means they'll be able to have like a good uh call-in customer service,
That's
automated customer
exactly what they're
service
trying to
lesson?
build. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the first deployment point in the commercialization of chatbots. We're already having that with like really bad chatbots, but my forecast would be in the next year, we're all going to have a conversation with a robot and not know it.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, that already happens online. Like, there's like online, text for help or whatever, like
right,
chat with a representative. Like, those are all fucking bots. And
right.
that's the closest I've experienced. I'm gonna
I
have
will
to
say,
go
okay, let
download
me
that.
addend that. I think in the next, let me extend it to 2 years. I think that most of us will have a conversation with a machine that has an emotional component to it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, emotion is the core, man. Listening to Elon Musk describe Neuralink, he's like, our brains are like, we are the limbic system, this emotional reptile thing, right? With a supercomputer, the frontal cortex, strapped on top of it, and AI and the ability to like implant devices which augment the brain. It's not going to be like taking over. It's just going to be another strap on supercomputer in front of that. And the problem is bandwidth. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Where it's like we've got this soda straw. We're trying to like suck this information through. It needs to turn into a river. It's a good
Yeah,
analogy. I'm like, man, yeah, that is the primary challenge for integration with machines, like brain machine integration.
right. Yeah, one of the most interesting stories around brain machine interfaces is Duke University has a robotics lab down, I think, in Argentina, I want to say, and they were using VR to train people how to use people who are paraplegic, how to use exoskeleton legs. They built these crazy exoskeleton legs, and they only had one pair, and they had eight. And they're in a lab, and they had eight people in the study, all who were paraplegic. And so they sent them home with Oculus Rifts and then the brain interface to try to basically gather enough data from them looking down at virtual legs and imagining that they were controlling them to figure out what are the kind of the thought signals to walk. And then they decoded
Right.
that and then used that to control the robotic legs, which is super cool. But the cooler thing was, after the study was over, the fact that people had used this VR training system started connecting their real legs back to their brain. And all 8 of them started regaining control of their legs. And this is when I say,
What?
like, people are thinking about VR too much as a, film tool or a game tool. It's a brain interface. It is the biggest bandwidth into our brain by like a thousandfold is our eyes.
Oh yeah. Right. Yes, absolutely. And it puts it into perspective. Like other animals, you understand so much better. I do anyway. When I think of like, okay, so their big pipe is their nose, or their big pipe is, you know what I mean? Like like animals like dogs,
That smell,
they're
right?
just fucking noses attached to a brain, and it's like,
Yeah,
whoa, what's that even like? So
yeah,
crazy. You
yeah.
guys don't have a pet, do you?
Just some very long plants that go around the roof here.
Oh man, I gotta up my plant game. Wow, you guys
Yeah.
got some long ones.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't even show you. It goes all the way from there. Wait, you probably can't see it, but it's about 50 feet long. That plant inside. That's Liza's
Jesus.
work.
How big is the pot?
Just this big, 12 inch. Just
Wow.
growing.
Yeah, I've
It's
been
a
playing a lot
creeper.
with automation systems, right? Like
Yeah.
automation systems that essentially take in data from sensors and produce action in control devices. And that could be a lighting system, that could be an airflow system, that could be any number of systems, but essentially like controlling behaviors of physical spaces. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I'm trying to use this system for right now is to take care of my living wall and my plants. Where
Nice.
I'm taking in data about the soil pH and the moisture level, and then using that to turn on and off, you know, pumps, just like water these plants. It's a cool
That's very
challenge,
cool.
but yeah, man, it's
Have you read
I'm
much of
really
Norbert Weissman, the who wrote about cybernetics in like the 50s? I bet you'd be
no.
really interested. It's the kind of early days of control systems and AI before there was even like basically transistors. It was all mechanical,
Yeah.
electromechanical systems. But he's very famous because he kind of created this idea of cybernetics, the ability to kind of make machines that use electronics to have like very complex control relationships with people and represent intent. But what was
Yeah.
so interesting about his work is that he kind of foreshadowed the reality we're living in now. Again, not even before it just computers, but before even like using digital systems. It was all analog at the time. And he basically said, well, if we build all these kind of systems to control things in the world, what would happen if these would kind of fell into the wrong hand or were put in the kind of the wrong incentives into? We could kind of build these kind of master slave societies essentially. It was super prophetic. But if
Interesting.
you're doing if you're
Yeah.
doing control systems, he's kind of the godfather of imagining like modern control systems and some of the social dilemmas that come out of that.
Yeah, that's funny, man. I'm gonna have to look him up. It's the ethics of technology. I think that's thinking about that in the 50s is way ahead of its time. But there were ethical dilemmas. There's always been ethical dilemmas attached to technology. Like the Industrial Revolution is a great example of that, where it's just like, okay, well, we've got this technology, it's controlled by the few, and exploits the many. Um,
Yeah, while at the same time providing economic independence to women for the first time ever.
Wait, what did the Industrial Revolution?
Yeah, women went to work in factories and they thought they were making money for the first time in their lives,
Right.
and they got independence. They didn't
Interesting.
have to
Yeah.
get married to be financially viable. So it's kind of, yeah, that kind of double-edged sword there. I mean, same
Yeah,
thing
I
with
was
social
gonna
media
say.
today, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, just dramatic changes to the world. So, dude, how's your camper? The camper you're building out? I wanted to ask you about
I
that because
love
I'm
it.
I'm doing something similar, but I'm doing it. I'm not doing a camper. I'm doing like an off-road, not like a crazy off-road vehicle, but like I'm doing like an off-road modification to my vehicle, and that includes like a bed platform in the back, and they call it
Nice.
overlanding. I'm like
Yep,
really into that right now.
that's dope.
So,
Yeah, Liza,
how's yours doing?
it's great. It's I mean, it's a slow project. It's like, constant renovation. But we did the biggest, we bought it partially built out, so it had, bed, insulation, um, counters, a sink, power system, no solar. So the biggest thing we've done is take the roof and I built out a custom roof rack using Unistrut. And we took a lot extra time to make it super stealthy because we are trying to be able to do stealth. We're more like stealth urban camping than like off-roading.
Yeah.
We want to be able to just kind of go
Oh,
anywhere
interesting.
and stop. Yeah. So we made
Yeah,
it
yeah.
so like we used a Unistrut and put in a deck up top, and then we put 200 watts of solar power as well as a marine hatch to be able to get up there from the bed and also be able to like stare
Yeah.
out just because there's no windows around the interior of the van. So that was like
Yeah,
the
good for
big project we did.
stargazing though, right?
Oh
You see those,
man, it's so good.
you see those satellites go by.
Definitely. Well, we also set it up. We bought these kind of two. They're called stadium seats. So they're designed to take to like a stadium, and they, instead of sitting on a bench, you can sit in this like nice reclining seat with armrests, and then it has this little hook that locks into the bench. So we put that on the roof, and it locks into our Unistrut system. So you're up on the roof in this like very reclined chair, but you're not worried about falling off. You're basically like locked into the roof, and we just kick back
Right.
there, and during pandemic's been great because we like just drive it to like, populated areas where, people are hanging out like along the bay there. And we're already automatically socially distanced because we're already, 12 feet off the ground when we're up there. And we just kick back and people, come by and ask us questions, and we get to have that kind of be in public while being private, and safe.
Yeah, they were doing, like, drive-in movies back at the start of the pandemic, like, my group of friends, and, a lot of people were doing that. They were, like, hanging out on
Love
top of
it.
their roof of their vehicle and blah, blah, blah. It was nice. It's like, yeah, that's I wish they would do that. I wish should do that again. Like,
I
should
love it.
organize that here at the labs.
That would be awesome. I love driving. For my birthday, it was last week. We went to down in San Luis Obispo. There's a drive-in, so we took the van there. Went to a drive-in there. When we were in Vegas for the Meow Wolf opening, there's a drive-in burger joint that has a movie playing in the parking lot, so you can get burgers and watch the movie. And yeah, I love the drive. I already love drive-ins, and now I love it even more because we can kind of pull up and be in our little like cozy little bed area and kick back.
That's awesome, man. So you went to Vegas with it? You took the van to Vegas?
Yeah, we took it there because we also didn't want to stay in a hotel room, so we literally stayed in the parking lot of Meow Wolf the whole time we were there for 2 days or 3 days.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. I wanna
Yeah,
go.
just that's why we
I wanna
got it.
talk to
Aside from
Jeff
it being
too.
fu Oh, yeah, yeah, you should check in with him, man. It's an interesting times. I'm glad he, like, stayed on staff even though they let a lot of people off, but, I mean, the other thing that was super exciting and I think be relevant to your work is, like, just, we all kind of have this idea, like, "Okay, someday we'll be able to get back together," but to, like, be at Meow Wolf, to be at a social event, to be at something that's designed to kind of pull people together in a special way, like, it made me realize, like, there's so much pent-up demand and need to get together and have fun, and it just got me excited that we're gonna be able to do that again someday.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's funny to, like, when you do have those social experiences now, it feels so dude, the period after this is gonna be a social renaissance, right? There's gonna be an explosion of new ideas, new ways of hanging out, cool new paradigms. Like, I was talking to somebody else on the podcast a couple episodes ago about this, and it was just like, I'm kind of fucking sick of Burning Man, dude. I'm sick of Burning Man ruling the like being the paradigm for like counterculture. There needs to be a new thing. Like the
Yeah,
wave has crested. What's the next fucking thing? And it's gonna I think that's gonna this pandemic is going to be the turning of the page into the next thing, and it's really exciting. It's like, what's it
yeah,
gonna be? I'm really stoked to see, you know.
I think you're totally right. My favorite name for the pandemic in terms of its social impact is the Great Pause. And I think
Yeah,
it's a pause we would have never taken. I've taken it in my own life. I've paused my social life. I've paused a lot of things. We're pausing so many things, and we just rarely have time to contemplate. And I think I agree with you. Like we're going to have a renaissance because not only has there been a pent up kind of activity, but people have a lot to write about or think about or react to right now, and they've been able to kind of look at themselves and the world in different ways. And not only and many people have had to develop new creative ways and techniques and technologies to do things, and some people will use that, and then other people have been away from their tools. Like for me, like I haven't been able to do my monthly music jam with folks where I get to play drums. It's like when I get back on
are you
those
still
drums
doing that?
again. Yeah,
That's
do another month.
awesome, man. That's
When I get
great.
back on those drums, I'm like gonna appreciate it 100 times more because I've been away from it. I think, like, I think a big part of resilience is developing gratitude, and I think for those that kind of really are feel like the loss of the things that we like so much and we need so much in our lives, when we're able to have those back, I think for me it's going to be an opportunity for a massive amount of gratitude and reconnecting with the things that we really value.
Yeah, you think it's probably gonna come in gradually. Like, I don't think there's just gonna be a day when it's like, "Okay, it's over," you
Right.
know? I think it's gonna be a gradual thing where, like, where you just start to slowly see that kinda thing come back, and then all before you know it, you'll be like, "Oh, shit, we're, like, doing the doing the social thing again," you know?
Last week, 2 weekends ago, I took my mom to the Oakland Coliseum to get vaccinated, and I drove her there. And we drove. You get in there, and there's like long, like lines of like weaving lines of cones that you have to drive through, and there's like 20 or 30 different checkpoints with National Guard folks till you finally get to these tents. And then you go into the tent, you get the
Wow.
vaccination, and you're still in your car, and then you move out and you wait for 15 minutes. But it was like this. I felt like the tent itself was this portal of like stepping through, at very least, the
Yeah,
beginning of the end, like taking my, because that's one of my
right.
biggest worries is like my mom getting ill. So just to like be like, oh, not only is like just she had that vaccination in her arm, but like just even the manifestation of people help, like the organization of it, the fact that like we're actually having some solutions rather than just like problems and questions, and the people coming together to help each other and coordinate, like just was like, okay, I'm ready for this new era. And I think that what
I love that analogy. It's a portal. Like, the tent is a
yes.
portal. You drive through and you're in a literally in a new world. And that's kinda true. My partner got her vaccine. She's, like, high exposure, you know, category or whatever. So she got her vaccine and she said the same thing. She was like, "I felt like it was this really profound moment where, like, everybody has come together, we've produced this vaccine, and now there's this huge effort, this big, like, big lift to get everybody vaccinated."
Yeah, I think her name is Arundhati Roy. She's a writer, and she wrote this piece at the beginning of the pandemic. And basically, it was saying like you could either look at this pandemic as a hole that you fell into, and you need to crawl back to where you were, or you could see it as as a portal to step through into something new. And I think she's right in saying like you're going to be not just in this pandemic, but into any sort of stumble that you have or kind of new moment in your life. If you're always calling back to where you were, you're not really looking around to see what the new situation is and how you can adapt.
Well, that's kinda what I was getting at before when I was, there's you see, like, half of my friends, less than half, but a good number of people I know kind of, like, fell into this abyss where they just could not adapt. And then another good portion of my friends, like, they did the COVID pivot. That's, like, what we've been calling it. And it's like, you just look around, you're like, "This is reality. What are we doing?" And then you pivot, and it's like a new thing, you know? And I think that, yeah, it comes down to human adaptability, man. You got to be adaptable, right? That is a successful person is somebody who can look at the shit that's happening right now and make correct pivots to best fit in that environment.
One of my favorite quotes, it's on a bench, it used to be at least, on a bench out at the Berkeley Marina here. It's by Helen Keller. She said, I'm going to pull it up here. Let's see. She said, security does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And I think,
Uh,
obviously, we have to do what we can to protect ourselves, but this idea, this kind of concept of security that people often kind of imagine, she kind of blows it open, basically saying like that's comfort. And
yeah.
obviously we all need our comfort
Yeah.
spaces to be healthy, but yeah, I love that idea. Like security doesn't exist. There's always uncertainty.
Yeah. Well, what we do is we find an acceptable level of risk, and everybody has a different level of risk.
Yes.
In the communal living scene, like, in these group, like, community houses, you see that has been the challenge of COVID, is like finding a balance between everybody's acceptable level of risk. And here at the labs, we've had to we've grown so much as a community, man, because like we've had to have
Mm,
those conversations and figure it out. And now it's like we got this. We've got like communal living in the COVID era. We've got it dialed. But it's like it was a lot of communication. It was a lot of
yep.
like uh yeah, just like group understanding and
Yeah.
compromise to come to a good balance.
That's cool. I'm glad to hear you guys got to that place. I've heard some other shared living situations that haven't been so successful, and it's been really
Oh yeah, man, I'm
disruptive.
definitely, it's fucking imploding left and right for sure. For sure. But yeah, man, that's cool. I'm really glad you guys are doing well, and I'm glad we're gonna have to do some overlanding when you guys go on a trip next. Just I don't know. It'd be cool to go on an adventure together sometime, or at least hang out at
Th-
Sean's. We've been like trying to do that for the past like month.
I know. Are you back in town for a while, or what's your
I
story?
am
You got
actually. We were going to go on a Death Valley, Utah, New Mexico trip, but just shit's been so busy with this new venture I'm starting, and just like I decided to push that back. And we have to go back to the British Virgin Islands to finish that install that ended our install at the beginning of COVID. We are now trying to get back there to finish that install. So I'm trying to balance that as well. But for the next month, I'll be here. Let's try and hang out maybe at
okay?
Sean's.
Yeah, yeah, we've been coming over sometimes and doing a bit dinner in the backyard. So one of these weekends, let's do that. But
Cool.
yeah, and
Awesome.
part of why we got the van is the dream of like van gatherings, like right, just like pulling up and just like having a little gathering here, and yeah, just making that so easy instead of big
Absolutely, man.
festivals, like or the kind of halfway between big festival and at home, but like little mini gatherings.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. Cool, man. Well, I have to call it because I gotta help somebody move their couch in about
Well, yeah, we
15
got to move
minutes.
our bed actually into the house ourselves. So it's a moving day for everybody. Well,
Cool,
great
man.
man.
Well,
I'm really grateful you reached out, and it's just nice to have this. I mean, this is a great example of like the ritual of like, okay, let's have a podcast just so we can have a conversation. It's nice.
that's
I
what
really
it is,
appreciate that
dude.
you're doing that.
Yeah, that's what this podcast has always been. It's like an excuse to have a conversation with other cool people. It's like, okay. All right, man. Well, say hi to Liza for me and let's
I
make
will.
it happen. Let's hang out at Sean's or something and like
Yeah,
just
let's do
get
it.
together in
It's
person.
usually Saturday nights.
Cool. All right,
We'll
brother.
we'll,
I'll
we'll
talk
ping
to you
you
later.
next time we're there. Bye.
Bye.